I'd like to spend the next few minutes giving you an update on what me and our group has been doing on blue waters in the past year. Of course, the highlight of which is this article which appeared in the journal Nature and whose simulation result made it to the cover of the journal. And the PI of the group is Warren Mori, and I will be presenting works by Dr. Victor Desek, who is a senior research member of our group, and two postdocs, Benjamin Winjum and also Wei-Ming Nam. And my talk will probably be broken out into four parts. In the beginning, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the particle and cell method, what it is, and what it is that we do. And also, I'm going to tell you about two of the main physics problems that we're doing. One is the plasma-based accelerator problem, which is the result of which made it to the cover of Nature. And also the second problem that I am working on mostly is the problem of a particle and cell simulation relevant to laser fusion. And I'm going to tell you what laser fusion is and what are some of the computational challenges associated with that. And also I'm going to tell you some of our efforts on porting our codes to future architectures. And of course, Galen played a very important role in this coding effort as well. So what is particle and cell method? So particle and cell method treats plasmas as a collection of particles. But however, the interactions doesn't scale up to the number of particles squared because the particles only interact with each other through the grid. So because the number of particles is much larger than the number of grids, the timing is dominated by the particle calculations, which mostly includes the calculation of the particle orbits and the current and charge deposition of these particles onto the grids. And of course, even though we have some very sophisticated particle and cell codes, most of the time is spent inside this loop, which consists of roughly only about 2% of our code. So porting these codes to future architectures and optimizations is fairly straightforward, although it's not always trivial, as I'm going to be talking about toward the end of this talk. So the main code that we're using in our group is the code Osiris. It's developed by UCLA and the Portuguese University IST. And it's a fairly mature code with many features. And I think some of the most important feature that's relevant to this group is that one, we have OpenMP and MPI parallelization. And we have recently started a CUDA branch. And also we have achieved over 2.2 sustained flops on the blue waters about 2 years ago. And we have shown good scaling on the Sequoia supercomputer at over 1.5 million cores. So, all right. So now let's dive into the physics. So this is the first of the two problems I'm going to be talking about, which is plasma-based accelerators. So what is plasma-based accelerators? The plasma-based accelerator is made up mostly of three parts. One is the driving beam, the driver. The driver loses the energy to make these plasma waves. And then you have what's called the witness bunch. The witness bunch takes the plasma wave and use it to accelerate itself to gain energy. And of course, the plasma acts as an intermediary between the driving bunch and the trailing bunch. And if you use a particle beam to make the plasma wave, this is called a PWFA, or a plasma wakefield accelerator. And if you use a laser to drive the plasma wave, it's called LWFA, or laser wakefield accelerators. So why do you need to use a plasma? Actually, the physics behind this is fairly straightforward. Is that energy equals to force times distance. So here is what's called a Livingston curve, which shows the progress of accelerator research from 1930, which is the invention of the cyclotrons, all the way up to today. So you can see the conventional technology, although it grew exponentially until the 1980s, have saturated since then. And of course, it's because conventional accelerators use metal, and metal have a limit, which is a so-called breakdown limit, which is the amount of field you can apply to that material before the wall breaks down and it will start sparking. And of course, so if you want to build conventional accelerators using the same technology, the only way you can do it is to make it bigger and bigger. And that's becoming more and more unrealistic. And of course, plasma doesn't have that problem because it is made up of ionized gas, and the particles are already broken down, so it has no breakdown limit. So it can support field which is 2 or 3 orders of magnitude larger than those in a conventional accelerator. And so you can see since the 1990s, there has been tremendous progress made in plasma-based accelerators. And so so these are some of the experiments in the past 20 years. The red dots represent experiments that's done using a laser driver, and the blue dots represent experiments that's done using a beam driver. As you can see now, a plasma-based technology can almost match conventional technologies. And I'm going to show you a few highlights from the past 10 years. So, and in the past 10 years, there has been many high-impact journal articles that came out in this topic. And here are some of these highlights. All of these were published in the journal Nature. And there were 2 journal covers, one in 2004, which 3 separate groups made monoenergetic electrons using a laser driver, and also the 2014 experiment, which I'll be talking more about in the next few slides. And in the next few slides, I'm going to concentrate on these 2 experiments. One is the 2007 experiment, where we took a 42 GeV beam from SLAC, and we doubled the energy of this beam in less than 1 meter of plasma. And also, so since then, we have made some refinements, and so the 2014 is a better and an improved version of the 2007 experiment. And I'm going to talk about these 2 experiments in more detail, and also tell you why it took us 7 years to go from here to here. Actually, the explanation for the delay is quite simple. Is that SLAC went offline for a few years, and it converted from the high energy physics facility to a light source called LCLS. So prior to 2007, the experiments all done in this facility called FFTB, and the FFTB beam is located near the end of the beam line. And after 2006, the entire SLAC experiment went down and was converted into a light source called LCLS, which stands for Line-X Coherent Light Source. And because of the location of the LCLS experiment, now the plasma-based accelerator experiment is done in the new facility called Phys, which I don't know what it stands for, but all I can tell you is that it is now located near the middle of the beam line. So the biggest difference between FFTB and Phys is the initial energy of these electron beams. In FFTB, the initial energy is around 40 GeV, and on Phys, the initial energy of these electrons is roughly 20 GeV. And in 2007, on the FFTB facility in SLAC, we used a single bunch, both as the driving bunch and the witness bunch. And here I'm showing you a plot of the electron beam, and also the blue is the plasma density, showing you that the FFTB beam acts both as a driver and the trailing bunch. As you can see in this experiment, part of the FFTB beam loses energy and part of it gain energy. And after 1 meter of plasma, we have achieved an energy doubling. But of course, even though we achieved an accelerating gradient, which is about 3 orders of magnitude larger than those done in a conventional accelerator, the quality of these accelerated electrons is very poor. As you can see, we cannot. This is the type of energy spread that is needed to study high energy physics. But of course, the plasma-produced electrons have a very large energy spread, and it's a very poor source for high energy physics experiments. So this is what we trying to achieve in the 2014 experiments. So in 2014 on Phys, we used a magnet to break the electron beam into a driving bunch and a trailing bunch. And also the additional feature is that there's so much charge in the trailing bunch now that the wake, which is now shown in the line now, is fairly flat. And the flat wake allows these particles to be accelerated in a uniform way. So this leads to a very narrow energy spread at the end of the experiment. So after about 36 centimeters of plasma, the facet beam gains 2 GeV, and it has less than 1% energy spread. So it took initially 1.5 kilometers inside a conventional accelerator to go from 0 to 20 GeV. And with plasma, we get an extra 2 GeV a boost in only less than 1 meter. So these are the results from the simulation called QuickPick. And the simulation is done on blue waters, and it's a fairly small simulation that took about 4,000 processors and around 16,000 CPU hours. And here's some highlights from the Nature article in the past year. On the right, I'm showing you the energy spectrum with a plasma and without. You can see without the plasma, the two bunches show up as one dot in the energy spectrum, and the dot is roughly at about 20 GeV. With a plasma, you can see some of the electrons lose energy and to excite the wave, to excite the plasma wave, and some of these electrons gain energy. And the witness bunch has a very narrow energy spread. And you can see we have very good quantitative agreement between simulation and experiments. And so, this year, we're actually all the experimental efforts is focused on the acceleration of positrons. And although I'm not allowed to show you any results from those experiments and the simulations associated with it, hope I can show you some of that next year. So, all right. So now that was an excellent example of things that has very good quantitative agreement. So now I'm going to shift my focus to my second problem, which is that of laser fusion. And in this case, actually, we cannot do the full-scale simulations, and we can only try to do the basic physics studies. So in laser fusion, the laser tries to compress the fusion field, and the goal of laser fusion is trying to extract more energy out of the fuel pellets than the input energy of the lasers. So in this case, actually, the excitation of plasma waves is detrimental to the experiments in two ways. One is that the excitation of plasma waves can cause the light to be scattered backwards, and you will lose energy to backscatter. And the second thing is, as I mentioned earlier, is that the plasma waves can accelerate electrons, and these electrons in turn will heat the fuel, and the hotter fuel makes it harder to compress, and it actually degrades the efficiency of the fuel pellets. So of course, this is a very challenging problem because of the time scale and the length scale involved in these systems. And in these systems, the length scale scans about 3 orders of magnitude from 1 micron, which is the wavelength of these lasers, to about 1 millimeter, which is the length of propagation of these beams. And the time scale spans about 6 orders of magnitude from 1 femtosecond, which is roughly the laser period, to a nanosecond, which is the duration of these lasers. And I think I'm going to go quickly because I think I'm running out of time. So yeah, 5 minutes. 7. Oh, okay. So I'm going to, okay. So now I'm good. So I'm going to talk about this slide a little bit. So this is what's done most commonly by experimentalists in our 1D simulations. So currently, what is done in these experiments is that after the end of the experiment, people can do hydro simulations and to get a rough idea of the temperature and the density profile in the experiment as a function of time. And then you can take one of these outputs from the hydro simulations, and you can use a post-processing tool that propagates the laser along one of these paths. And then from that, you can predict what is the likely the frequency and also the energy of the scattered light using a post-processing tool called SLIP or NewLip. But however, now in the past few years, we're trying to convince the experimentalists to use particle and cell codes to do the same thing. And the particle and cell codes can get the backscatter information right, but it can also tell you the energies of the energetic electrons, which it can also be compared against experiments. And also it gives much more detailed physics. And I think I'm going to skip some of these slides just to say that these particle and cell simulations will give you a lot more detail than those from the post-processing tools. And of course, the real physics is not at all 1D. because the lasers, if you take a cross section of the lasers is not at all a plane wave, but it's really this ugly looking thing. And this is what the laser looked like in the early 1980s. And now even with very sophisticated optics, the laser's a lot more uniform, but it's still made up of many of these so-called laser speckles. Each of these laser speckles is a few microns wide. And the laser speckles is problematic because you can take the average intensity of the laser and you can perform linear analysis on it. And you can say, well, the average laser is actually stable with respect to laser plasma instability. But one of these laser hotspots is unstable. And these laser hotspots can trigger laser plasma interactions inside the hotspot and also in the large surrounding area. And in our simulations, we have identified 3 processes which the laser hotspots can trigger LPIs in surrounding areas. One is the seeding of backscatter light from plasma waves, and also we can have seeding of laser plasma interactions by the plasma wave, by the light propagating from one speckle to another. And also the third process is inflation, where hot electrons move from one speckle to another, and the hot electrons can reduce the damping of the plasma waves, and that also reduces the instability threshold and causes neighbor speckles to go unstable. And these processes are 2D and 3D in nature. So here's an estimate of the simulations that we're doing currently and the simulations we like to do. So currently we're doing 2D multi-speckle simulations along NIF beam, and one of these simulations take about 1 to 10 million CPU hours. And we can do 2D and 3D simulations of 2 speckles, and one of these simulations take about 10 million CPU hours also. But however, the holy grail of this system is a 3D multi-speckle simulation along the NIF beam path. And one of these simulations would take roughly 1 billion hours or 2 whole months on blue waters. And of course, that's not feasible. So this motivates our code development work. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you what we've been doing on GPUs and Intel Phis. So I think some of these machines, what they have in common is that the latest processors have many processing units, which you cannot treat them as individual MPI tasks. And the second property that's shared by all of these machines is that it is very cheap to do computations on these machines, but it is very expensive to move the data. So data locality is very important. So even though the example I will be giving you in the next few slides is a code written for the GPU, really some of these ideas can be applied to the GPUs, to the Intel Phis, or even conventional Intel GPUs using OpenMP. So on the GPU, we apply a local domain decomposition scheme based on the idea of tiles. And on each GPU, we associate each thread block with each tile. And so therefore, within the tile, the grid and particle data are aligned and they can be easily parallelized. And the only thing you have to do is to change the data structure or your particle data to add the additional dimension, which is essentially the tile ID. And with this new data structure, you can parallelize these loops fairly easily. And of course, at the end of each time step, the particles will move, and it's possible for these particles to move from one tile to another. And you have to write a particle manager which take care of this. And turns out that this particle manager is fairly inexpensive for 2 reasons. Is that it's not quite a full sort because most of the particles, they do stay within the tile. And also it's fairly easy for us to code because we're very experienced with message passing. And this is just essentially a local message passing scheme. And so this code is ported to the Fermi 2090, and we see a 91 times speed up over the Intel i7. And also we actually ported this technique to an Intel i7 on 12 cores using OpenMP. And you can see it even works on a traditional Intel processor and with nearly ideal speed up on 12 cores. And also we now have a version that runs on multiple GPUs using MPI. And you can see on about 100 GPUs, we get a speed up of 77, which is over 70% efficient. And we know why the efficiency is not as good as we like, because this code uses an FFT-based solver, which doesn't scale up to many GPUs. And we believe that the efficiency will be improved if you use a finite difference solver for the fields. And all of these codes are available here on the E3 website and also on the Pixi website. And so I'm going to leave this slide up here. The Pixi is an NSF-funded center at UCLA, and it stands for Particle in Cell and Kinetic Simulation Software Center. And here are some of the goals of our center. And the Pixi website is located at pixi.e3.ucla.edu. And I'd like to thank Galen in particular and the Blue Water team for their continuous support in our project. So thank you very much.
We are a bit late. We have time for questions. Any questions?
On these excuse me, on these GPUs, what performance numbers are you getting, like flops wise?
We didn't measure it, but I know the CPUs we usually get between 20 to 25% efficiency. So which is quite good. And there are things you can do too. So I don't think it's a good measurement, because there are things you can do to increase computational intensity on the GPU. For example, you can increase the interpolation order. You can make the interpolation, or you can use a higher order particle push to make the integration of the orbits more computationally intensive, and that will make the code more efficient, and maybe that's better suited for the GPU. We have not explored all of these possibilities yet, but we know how to do that. So I think no matter what the number is, it will be quite efficient. So if there's a better Petco out there, we can probably reverse engineer it and get to that number. And I think we know all the tricks. So I think on the GPU, what you really want to do is minimize data movement. So there are tricks you can do to boost that number, either with a more accurate solver, so you can take larger time steps, or whatever it is.
Other question?
Yes.
Could you talk just a little bit more about the Xeon experience and how that relates, and how it, what generation you're using? The first generation, is that correct?
I'm not the person that wrote the GPU code. So, but I think this is done on a local cluster, which is about 4 or 5 years old. So, but we, of course, and we've been working with the NVIDIA people, and we have numbers for the.
Yeah. No, my question was on the Intel.
And
I thought
yeah.
you said the Xeon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have also, that's right. We have a Xeon. We do have Xeon using OpenMP. That's right. So it's the same technique, but we just coded. We took the CUDA code and cast it into OpenMP, and we get near the ideal speed up. And that.
I thought you said it was the Xeon. It was a Phi.
It's a.
Okay.
Yeah, you went back to the standard CPU.
Right.
With the OpenMP.
With the OpenMP.
Yeah. Okay.
But you got a speed up though, a pretty significant one.
Right, which is roughly ideal. Which on 12 cores, it's about over 11 times speed up.
I mean, that's the benefit of modernizing your code.
Exactly.
On the standard CPU.
Exactly. It figures out where your efficiencies are, and it fixes the legacy codes as well. I think so.
So I have a question. The difference in the source code between the CPU version and the GPU version, is that limited to those 2% that you mentioned in the beginning?
So
where most of the...
Yeah, so it's mostly the changing of the data structure. So now we have the new data structure, which allows for data alignment, and also just additional subroutine, which essentially is message passing.
Right, but you said in the beginning that 2% of the code represents the majority of the computing effort.
Right.
So is the change limited to those 2%?
And this is what's, and this is the thing I'm talking about is applied to the skeleton code, which contains only these 2%.
Okay.
So that we have a test bed which just contains the small percentage, and then the experience that we learn from these test bed codes is then applied to the production code.
Okay.
So
I
then,
have a final question.
Actually, I just have a physics question, really. So there's this laser wakefield acceleration, and you're saying you can get higher energies than just a
The metal.
cyclotron, right?
yeah.
But how does the current compare? Right, because that's a big challenge. It's getting high current out of these beams, and that's important for many applications.
So it's the current. I don't believe in plasma wakefield accelerators. I don't think there's a limit in the current, because we actually use the accelerator beams to drive the wake, and also the witness bunch is also came from a conventional accelerator themselves. So I don't think currents is a problem. The main challenge now is there's so many good properties in plasma-based accelerators, because the what's so-called emittance is also preserved. The brightness, the beam came from the accelerators, and the transverse property doesn't degrade over the transverse property doesn't degrade over the length of the experiment. But this is not true for the positrons, because the reason is obvious that we don't have antiplasmas. So the physics only applies to positrons. If you have positron driver, positron bunch, and antiplasmas. So there's a lot we don't understand about positrons. For the electrons, I think we have a good handle on everything. So the energy gain is only limited by the length of the plasma we can produce, and both in terms of the energy spread and the transverse properties are excellent. Are those that's seen in a conventional accelerator. So this is what the conventional accelerator beam look like, and then this is the beam that's passed through the plasma. So I think in terms of the transverse spread, and also the energy spread is quite comparable. So I don't think you have any problems with the electrons. Actually, the challenge now is with positrons, because we don't know how to there are some challenges in the focusing of the the positrons using plasmas as a medium, and hopefully that will be addressed next year when I come back.
Okay.
So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.